One Thanksgiving when I was 14, my uncle's family hosted dinner at their house. For some context, they live on a quiet dead-end street across from a forest that's about a 2-hour drive from us in a more rural area. My family and our extended family from one side arrived along with all of my cousins that afternoon. I spent most of the day playing PlayStation in my cousin's room with my other relatives until we were called down for dinner. We were all sitting around the massive dining room table, just eating all the great Thanksgiving food my family had cooked, such as turkey, ham, stuffing, potatoes, and all that good stuff. My littlest cousin, Justin, was the first one to finish his meal, and he ran off into the kitchen. He always did that at every meal, as he was too hyper to wait for everyone else to finish eating before we started dessert. My mom instructed me to go bring him back into the dining room. I walked into the kitchen expecting to see him on the couch, but he wasn't in there. I noticed one of the side yard motion detecting lights was going off, so I figured he must have gone into the backyard. I stepped onto the patio and looked around the backyard calling his name. It was dark out there and we didn't have any lights in our backyard, so if he was out there I couldn't see him. I continued yelling his name, and then I went around to the side yard to see if he was over there. Sure enough, I found him standing in the side yard peeking over the fence. I pulled him down from the fence and asked him what he was doing. He said just talking to the man behind the fence. I asked him what man, and he said there was a funny man on the other side of the fence. I stared at him for a few seconds, then stood on my tiptoes to peek over the fence. I couldn't see anything but forest on the other side. "Come on, let's go back inside," I told him, admittedly a bit freaked out. When I got back to the dining room table, I told my dad about it. My dad is not at all the type of person to assume the worst in scenarios like this, so naturally he quickly dismissed me and got back to his conversation with the adults. After dinner, we passed around the pie and ice cream. My extended family stuck around for about another 2 hours after that to help clean up and unwind. Then by 10, most of them began to leave as they had long drives back home ahead of them. My brother and my parents and I would actually be spending the night at my uncle's, as would my other uncle's family. That night, me and my 2 cousins and my brother were staying up late playing PlayStation in my cousin Dylan's room. Justin had gone to sleep, so me, Dylan, and my brother Kai were just playing Black Ops. Then we all heard a sound from outside, down in the backyard. It sounded like a metallic squeaking. We all looked at each other. Dylan walked over to the window and then suddenly ducked down. We asked him what he was doing, and he said there was some guy on the swing set in the backyard. Kai and I both said no way, so despite his protest, we peeked out the window to see for ourselves. I felt my heart stop as I saw a dark figure was indeed sitting on one of the swings, just swinging slowly back and forth. I tried to duck down before he noticed me, but I could start to see his head turn towards me. We all laid on the floor whispering, asking who that was. The figure was too tall to be any of our parents, and it appeared to be wearing some kind of fedora, none of which our parents owned. After a few seconds, we noticed the swing squeaking suddenly stopped. We were too afraid to look out of the window, so we just laid on the floor for another 10 minutes or so. Then we agreed that someone had to check if the coast was clear. I slowly sat up on my knees to peek out the window. I was horrified to see the man standing on the grass directly below the window, staring up at me with this wide, open-mouthed smile. I screamed and backed away from the window, at which point Dylan opened the window. He was the oldest of us, so I guess he was the bravest. He started yelling threats at the man, to which he would later tell me the guy gave no reaction to and just kept smiling. Kai ran out of the room and down the hall, which I later found out was to wake up our parents. During all this commotion, Justin had gotten out of bed and walked over to the window and started telling us that that guy outside was the funny man from earlier. Dylan shut the window and grabbed Justin and ran down the hall. Then Kai came back with his parents and my parents. But when they went to the window, there was no one out there. Dylan claimed he never saw the man leave. My dad and my uncle ran around the backyard for a bit yelling threats, but didn't find anything. It must have taken 40 minutes for everyone to calm down, at which point our parents closed all the blinds and told us to wake them up if the guy came back and they'd call 911. Needless to say, it was a sleepless night after that, but as far as we know, the guy didn't come back. The story didn't end there, however. Not even a week later, my uncle mentioned to my family that Justin had been complaining about the funny man showing up in the backyard at night and throwing things at his windows. Dylan had also said he heard rocks and other objects being thrown at his window at night. They called the cops, but there wasn't much they could say other than recommending cameras. The harassment continued sporadically for about a month, and then it stopped. Just like that. The guy never came back. Today I'm 17, and they still live in that house without incident ever since that one Thanksgiving. The entire situation is just extremely weird and creepy, and is still a common topic among family gatherings to this day. It was a small Thanksgiving. My wife and daughter were cooking dinner for our family and my wife's parents. We typically eat dinner late, so we started cooking around 4 and planned to have dinner by 7. At some point, my wife realizes we never bought ice cream. Her dad is very big on having vanilla ice cream with the pie, so she asked me to run down to the nearby Costco to pick up a tub of it, and I obliged. I got in my car and drove a few blocks down to the Costco. It was around 6 and already pitch black out and raining a decent amount. Of course, being Thanksgiving, the Costco was absolutely mobbed. I ended up parking in what literally had to be the farthest, most secluded corner from the Costco. As I got out of my car and locked it, I noticed in my peripheral vision a man I hadn't seen when I parked. He seemingly came out of the shadows and was just pacing by a shopping cart drop-off area. It seemed weird, and I made sure to lock my car and not make eye contact with him as I started my long journey through the lot towards the Costco. It took long as hell to get out of there because the place was absolutely packed, but once I did, I was about ready to get home. I walked along the side of the store to the secluded corner I was parked at. I'll admit I was also a bit scared to see that guy from earlier, who I had forgotten all about, was still there with his back to me, pacing by the shopping carts. I watched him as I unlocked my car and reached for the door, at which point I took my eyes off him. I nearly had a heart attack as I got in the driver's seat and saw he was now standing directly in front of my car, just standing stiff as hell. He was wearing a COVID mask, but I could see his eyes. They looked lifeless, I'd say is the best way to describe them, and they were locked right on me. I can now see he appeared to be in his late 20s, African-American guy with a maroon beanie and a black puffer jacket. He was wearing 2 golden earrings on his left ear. Can I help you? I said with an audible quiver in my tone. Yeah, he responded after a few seconds in a gruff voice. What you know about engines? Not much, I said. He stared at me for at least 5 more seconds. There still seemed to be no emotion in his eyes at all. I think my battery's dead. You got any jumper cables? I don't know how we had suddenly gone from talking about his engine to his battery. Nah, man, I don't. Sorry. Which was the truth for the record. I shut my driver's side door and started my engine, turning on the headlights. But this guy was still standing in front of my car, blocking me from pulling out. What does this guy want? I mumbled to myself. I decided I'd just stare at him with a dirty look until he moved. This did squat. He continued to just stare back at me with those lifeless eyes. But then I noticed something. His eyes weren't locked on me anymore. He seemed to be moving his gaze to something behind me. I darted my eyes up to the rearview mirror. There was a man in a ski mask creeping around the left side of my car. I shifted it into drive and just started moving forward. The man took a step back and started to reach for something in his coat pocket, at which point I floored it and swung to the right to go around him. I headed straight for the parking lot exit and glanced in my rearview mirror to see the two guys taking off in the opposite direction deeper into the lot. Then I was shocked to see two other guys emerge from the bushes my car had been parked in front of and follow them. It was clear that I had nearly fallen victim to some kind of setup. Shaken up as hell, I drove quickly back home, making sure I wasn't followed. Then I ran into the house with the ice cream, explaining to everyone what happened. It took me about 10 minutes to calm down, but once I did, I phoned the cops just to report suspicious people at the Costco parking lot. Afterwards, I tried my best to go about having my Thanksgiving dinner. The fact that I just narrowly escaped a robbery or possibly losing my life stayed on my mind, though. I'm a 25-year-old guy, but when this happened, I was only 15. That year, my whole family was at my grandmother's house for the day for Thanksgiving. She doesn't live in that house anymore, but it was this 2-story little cozy house out in the boondocks. They had a few acres of land and the house was surrounded by woods. Anyways, by that evening, most of my family was there and everyone was just sitting around drinking or watching football before dinner would start. I had just been sitting in the living room talking to some of my relatives when my mom came over and asked me to take a short walk through the woods with my little brother before dinner started since he was getting bored. I agreed. I myself didn't mind that I would be getting some time away from all these conversations with my relatives. Me and my brother grabbed our coats and went out the back of the house and started walking down this dirt path through the woods I had taken many times before. It was about 2 miles long and led to an old abandoned well in the middle of the woods. I planned on turning around before we would make it to the well, however. It was quiet and peaceful out there and even lightly snowing. I remember exactly what happened before I first saw it. Me and my brother were just talking about the PC I was currently building back at our house, when I remember looking straight ahead and seeing something standing out amidst the snow and countless tree trunks farther up along the path. There was a human hand wrapped around one of the tree trunks up ahead. Judging by the hand's position on the tree, it seemed the person was standing directly behind the trunk, facing the tree with their right hand wrapped around the side of it. They were an average height, probably like 5'10" or something. I didn't really know what to make of it, and my brother hadn't noticed it, so I just kept walking. I figured it was just a neighbor or something, even though they were technically on my grandparents' property. As we got within like 20 feet of the tree, I noticed the hand disappear back behind it. At that point, I took my eyes off the tree briefly to look at my brother as I was talking to him, and the next time I looked back was when we walked past the tree. There was no one behind it, but I noticed a large cluster of boot prints in the snow leading to and from the tree. Did I find it odd? Definitely. Was I scared? Not necessarily. I'd seen weirder things out here before. Not even a minute later, though, I saw that hand again. This time I pointed out to my brother, which I guess was a mistake because he immediately wanted to go over there and see who it was, trying to act all tough. My brother's always been like that. He started to pick up his pace as he walked over to the tree. I followed next to him. As we got within 20 feet, he called out to the person. We paused as the hand disappeared behind the tree, but only for a few minutes before a man stepped out from behind the tree. He appeared to be 40s, balding, beer gut, and was wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans. Nothing really seemed that odd about him other than the fact that it was way too cold to be wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He introduced himself quickly as Mark and said that he was the next door neighbor. I didn't even know my grandparents had a neighbor. I had always assumed that this whole trail was included in their property. He seemed friendly enough, though, and so me and my brother were polite as we introduced ourselves as the grandkids of his neighbors, my grandparents, and we told him we were there for Thanksgiving. I asked him which direction his house was, but he just completely ignored my question as he asked me if my brother and I wanted to help him shovel snow off his driveway. I didn't feel comfortable following this guy back to his house, nor did I want to shovel snow, so I told him we were good. He asked if we were sure and produced a wad of cash from his pocket and held it out towards us. "My house is just that way," I remember him saying, briefly gesturing further down the trail. I said thanks for the offer, but we should probably get going. As soon as I said that, I put my arm around my brother and we just turned around and walked off. I didn't look back until we had been walking for a minute or so. When I did, I just saw the marked guy standing in the exact same spot. No more cheeky smile. He just looked like he was slightly pissed off as he stared at us unmoving. I thought the whole thing was creepy as all hell at that point. We got back just in time as everyone was sitting down for dinner. The first thing I did was find my grandmother and ask her about the creepy neighbor. She looked confused as she told me that that part of the trail was part of her property, and they didn't have any neighbors in that direction for another 5 miles or so.